Then, I heard a sickening sound to my right. It was the sound of raw meat being chewed. I snapped my flashlight beam toward the corner of the room. Sitting on an overturned bucket was a man. He was shockingly thin, his skin pale and covered in sores. He was wearing an oversized, dirty suit jacket. Story 1. The Water Bureau Worker. I used to work maintenance for the Portland Water Bureau. It's usually a pretty boring job, fixing burst mains, dealing with angry homeowners, driving around in a yellow truck all day. But in the winter of 2026, things got weird. We started seeing these massive, inexplicable drops in water pressure in the northern part of the Pearl District. It wasn't a leak. The sensors indicated that hundreds of gallons of water were being actively rerouted and drawn from a sealed utility sector that hadn't been operational since the 1990s. My supervisor handed me a flashlight, a map of the old blueprints, and told me to go check the main shutoff valve down in Sector 4. I should have asked for a partner, but it was a Friday afternoon. I wanted the overtime, and I figured it was just a rusted valve that needed a wrench. That was my first mistake. I drove my work truck to an alleyway behind an old converted warehouse, pried up the heavy iron manhole cover, and climbed down the rusted ladder into the dark. The initial tunnels were exactly what you'd expect. Concrete walls, the smell of damp earth and rust, and a thick layer of dust. I turned on my heavy-duty halogen flashlight and started walking. I had to go about half a mile deep, following the massive iron pipes. It was quiet, peaceful almost, just the sound of my own boots echoing against the concrete. I was listening to a sports podcast in one ear, totally relaxed, just treating it like another day on the clock. About 20 minutes in, the concrete tunnel started to widen into a larger, cavernous maintenance hub, and the smell changed. The stale, metallic scent of the pipes was suddenly replaced by something thick, sour, and unmistakable. It smelled like human waste, rotting food, and smoke. I paused, shining my light ahead. The floor of the tunnel wasn't concrete anymore. It was covered in a makeshift path of flattened cardboard boxes and stolen wooden pallets. I kept walking, shining my beam along the walls. That's when I saw the pipe. Someone had taken a heavy-duty industrial drill and physically bored a hole straight into a high-pressure water main. They had jury-rigged a complex system of PVC pipes, duct tape, and garden hoses to siphon the city's water deeper into the unmapped tunnels. Now, this is the part where you're going to yell at your screen. Any sane human being would have taken a picture with their phone, climbed their happy ass back up the ladder, and called the Portland police. But my ego got the better of me. I thought, hey, it's probably just a couple of junkies. I'll just follow the hose, tell them to get out, and shut off the valve. I puffed up my chest, gripped my heavy steel wrench like a baseball bat, and followed the garden hose deeper into the darkness. The tunnel sloped aggressively downward, taking me beneath the primary grid. The temperature dropped by at least 15 degrees. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating something that made my stomach drop into my shoes. The tunnel opened up into a massive, cavernous underground storm reservoir, and it was full. It wasn't just a couple of tents. It was a sprawling, subterranean shantytown. There were dozens of shelters made from stolen tarps, chain-link fencing, and old mattresses. String lights powered by stolen car batteries cast a sickly, dim yellow glow over the area. The garden hose I had been following emptied into a massive plastic rain barrel in the center of the camp. It looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. But the most terrifying part was the absolute silence. There had to be 50 people living down here, but there wasn't a single sound. I stood at the edge of the reservoir, frozen. I realized instantly how catastrophically stupid I had been. I was alone, underground, completely out of radio range, standing in the middle of a lawless colony. I slowly started walking backward, trying to retreat into the shadows of the tunnel. But my heavy work boot caught the edge of a wooden pallet. I stumbled, and my steel wrench hit the concrete floor with a deafening clang that echoed like a gunshot. The string lights in the camp instantly flicked off, plunging the entire reservoir into pitch blackness. My heart hammered against my ribs. I aimed my flashlight down into the dark. From the shadows of the tarps, people started emerging. They didn't look like regular homeless folks you see asking for change. They were covered in soot, their clothes literal rags, and their eyes were wide, adjusted to the dark, staring directly at me with a primal, territorial hostility. Some of them were holding lengths of rebar. Others had jagged pieces of broken glass taped to the ends of broom handles. They weren't saying a word. They just started walking toward me, moving as a unit. "I'm just a city worker," I yelled, my voice cracking in panic. I'm leaving right now." A tall man in a filthy, oversized coat pointed a crowbar directly at my face and let out a guttural, terrifying screech that sounded more animal than human. I didn't try to reason with them anymore. I turned and ran. I sprinted back up the sloping tunnel, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the concrete walls. Behind me, I could hear the slapping of bare feet and heavy boots on the wet ground. There was no yelling, no angry shouting. Just the terrifying, synchronized sound of a dozen people sprinting after me in the dark. I pushed myself harder than I ever have in my life. My lungs burned. Every time I glanced back over my shoulder, my flashlight beam would catch the glint of a metal pipe or a pair of manic eyes just 30 feet behind me. They knew these tunnels better than I did. They were gaining on me. I reached the rusted ladder and didn't even use my feet. I practically hauled my entire body weight up using just my arms. As I grabbed the rim of the manhole to pull myself onto the alleyway pavement, I felt a cold, filthy hand wrapped tightly around my left ankle. I screamed, kicking wildly with my right boot. I connected with something soft, a face or a shoulder, and the grip released. I scrambled out onto the wet asphalt, grabbed the heavy iron manhole cover, and dragged it back over the hole with a massive clang. I stood on top of the manhole cover, hyperventilating, staring down at my ankle. There were deep, bloody fingernail gouges digging straight through my thick work socks. I drove straight back to the depot and quit on the spot. I told my supervisor to call the police, to call the National Guard. I didn't care. The city ended up sending a heavily armed tactical unit down there 3 days later. They found the camp, but it was completely empty. The colony had just packed up and moved even deeper into the unmapped recesses of the city. I live in Montana now. I don't go to cities anymore, because I know that beneath the coffee shops and the luxury apartments, there is an entire army of desperate people living in the dark, and they do not want to be found. That city worker was lucky to make it out with just a scratch. It makes you wonder what else is hiding right beneath our feet. Have you ever explored an abandoned place, a tunnel or a basement, and instantly felt like you weren't alone? Tell me about your closest call down in the comments right now, before we dive into our next nightmare. And if you're enjoying the video, hit that like button and subscribe to Creepy Digest to feed the algorithm. Story 2. The Great. I was a junior at Portland State University in 2026. It was a Thursday night, around 1 a.m., and I was walking back to my apartment after a long shift washing dishes at a pub downtown. I was exhausted, my brain was fried, and I just wanted to get into bed. I was walking down a dimly lit side street near the Burnside Bridge. I pulled my phone out of my pocket to change the song I was listening to, and as I did, my keychain caught on the fabric. My apartment keys flipped out of my hand, bounced on the wet sidewalk, and slid perfectly through the gaps of a heavy iron storm grate set into the pavement. I swore loudly, dropping to my knees. I pulled out my phone flashlight and shined it down through the rusty iron bars. By some absolute miracle, the keys hadn't fallen all the way down into the abyss. They were resting on a small concrete ledge about 6 feet down, right next to an access ladder that descended into the storm drains. It was 1 a.m. My roommates were asleep, and I didn't have the money for an emergency locksmith. I looked at the grate. It was heavy, but it wasn't bolted down. It was just held in place by its own weight. I told myself it would take 30 seconds. Lift the grate, hop down to the ledge, grab the keys, and climb right back out. It was a dumbass decision. The kind of Monday morning quarterback thing you yell at people in horror movies for doing. But I was tired, and logic completely escaped me. I wedged my fingers under the iron grate and hauled it upward. It was incredibly heavy, but I managed to flip it over onto the sidewalk. I shined my light down again. Just 6 feet. Easy. I lowered myself into the hole, my feet finding the concrete ledge. I crouched down, grabbed my keys, and shoved them in my pocket. I looked up to climb out. That was when a man stepped out of the shadows of the alleyway above me. He was incredibly tall, wearing a thick, filthy parka that looked like it hadn't been washed in a decade. His face was obscured by a dark hood. He didn't say a word to me. He just walked calmly over to the hole, grabbed the heavy iron grate, and flipped it back over the opening, slamming it shut with a massive, deafening crash. "Hey!" I screamed, grabbing the iron bars from below. "What the hell are you doing? Let me out!" The man just stared down at me through the bars for a few seconds. He tilted his head, smiled a rotten, toothless grin, and then walked away, disappearing into the Portland fog. Panic seized my entire body. I pushed upward on the grate with both hands, using my legs for leverage, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped 6 feet underground. I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I shined my light down the access ladder. The concrete shaft dropped another 20 feet before opening up into a large, horizontal storm tunnel. I had no choice. If I wanted to get out, I had to climb down and find another exit. Maybe a manhole cover I could push up from underneath. I climbed down the rusted rungs, my hands shaking violently. When I hit the bottom, the smell hit me. It was a putrid mix of stagnant water, urine, and burning plastic. I started walking down the tunnel. It was wide enough for a car to drive through. Garbage was piled high against the curved walls. After about 5 minutes of walking, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. It sounded like someone tapping a metal pipe against the concrete, coming from deep within the tunnel ahead of me. I quickly turned off my phone flashlight, plunging myself into absolute darkness. I pressed my back against the cold, damp wall and held my breath. The tapping got closer. Then a voice echoed down the tunnel. It was a raspy, sing-song whisper that sounded like a child's nursery rhyme sung by a maniac. "Found a rat in the maze. Shiny shoes, shiny phone. Gotta pay the toll to go home." They were hunting me. That guy up top hadn't just trapped me as a prank. He was a scout. He pushed me down here so the rest of them could strip me of my clothes, my phone, and whatever else they wanted. I saw the beam of a harsh LED light sweep across the tunnel wall about 50 yards ahead. Behind the light, I could make out the silhouettes of 3 people. They were hunched over, moving quickly, carrying what looked like baseball bats. I didn't wait to introduce myself. I turned and sprinted blindly in the opposite direction. I couldn't use my light, so I was just keeping one hand on the tunnel wall, running as fast as I could in the pitch black. I tripped over trash, scraped my knees, and kept running. Behind me, the sing-song whispering stopped, replaced by aggressive, angry shouting. "Get him! He's running toward the junction!" I saw a faint sliver of moonlight piercing the darkness ahead. It was another storm grate. I ran toward it, ignoring the burning in my lungs. Beneath the grate was another rusted access ladder. I threw myself onto the ladder and scrambled upward. I could hear their footsteps splashing in the water just yards behind me. I reached the top of the ladder, planted my shoulders against the iron grate, and shoved upward with every single ounce of adrenaline in my body. The grate popped out of its frame and clattered onto the street. I scrambled out onto the pavement just as a hand reached up from the dark hole, swiping at my shoe and missing by inches. I didn't stop to put the grate back. I ran for 6 straight blocks until I found an open 24-hour convenience store. I collapsed inside, completely covered in mud and sewage, and begged the clerk to call the police. The cops came, took my statement, and essentially told me I was an idiot for going down there. They said the subterranean homeless colonies had become violently territorial, and that if those people had caught me, they wouldn't have just taken my phone. They would have taken my teeth, my clothes, and my life, and left my body to rot in a drainage pipe where nobody would ever find it. I still live in Portland, but I don't walk at night anymore. And if I drop something on the street, even if it's a $100 bill, I leave it right where it is. Story 3. The basement door. Rent in Portland in 2026 was a joke. I was working as a freelance graphic designer, barely scraping by. So when I found a spacious 1-bedroom apartment in a historic brick building in Old Town for under $1,000 a month, I signed the lease immediately. The landlord was a sleazy absentee guy who just handed me the keys and told me not to bother him unless the building was on fire. The building was over 100 years old. It had creaky hardwood floors, drafty windows, and a massive, creepy, unfinished basement that all the tenants shared for laundry and storage. For the first month, it was great. The neighbors were quiet, mostly older folks who kept to themselves. I set up my desk by the window and fell into a comfortable routine. I'd work late into the night, do my laundry in the basement on weekends, and mind my own business. The only weird thing about the basement was a large, heavy wooden door tucked away behind the water heaters. It was locked with a heavy padlock. I figured it was just the landlord's private storage or an old utility closet. The strange occurrences started around week 5. Things started going missing from my apartment. Nothing major at first, a box of protein bars from the pantry, a 6-pack of beer from the fridge, an old winter coat I had left draped over a dining chair. I lived alone. I was absolutely certain I was locking my door. I assumed the landlord was coming in while I was asleep, or maybe one of the older neighbors had a master key. I bought a cheap interior chain lock and installed it myself, thinking that would solve the problem. Then, the noises started. Because I worked late, I was usually awake at 3 a.m. In the dead of night, when the city traffic died down, I would hear this awful, rhythmic scraping sound coming from directly beneath my floorboards. It sounded like heavy furniture being dragged across concrete. One night, the scraping was so loud, it vibrated through my desk. I put my ear to the floorboards. I didn't just hear scraping. I heard a muffled, raspy cough. Someone was in the basement directly below my unit. It was 3:30 a.m. My logical brain told me to call the police, report a potential break-in, and lock my bedroom door. But anger overrode my common sense. I was convinced it was a neighbor stealing my stuff, and I wanted to catch them red-handed. I grabbed a heavy metal flashlight, unlocked my door, and crept down the main stairwell to the basement. The basement was pitch black. The main overhead light bulb had been shattered. I flicked on my flashlight. The beam swept over the dusty laundry machines and the rusted pipes. The room was empty. But as I swept the light toward the back corner, my breath hitched in my throat. The heavy wooden door behind the water heaters, the one that had been padlocked for a month, was standing wide open. The padlock was lying on the concrete floor, cut clean in half by bolt cutters. I crept closer, shining my light into the doorway. It didn't lead to a storage closet. It led to a steep, crumbling brick staircase that descended even deeper underground. This was part of the infamous Shanghai Tunnels, the old 19th century underground network built beneath Old Town. The city was supposed to have sealed these access points decades ago. I stood at the top of the stairs, shining my light down. The air coming up from the stairwell was freezing cold and smelled strongly of unwashed bodies and burnt copper. "Hello?" I called out. It was a pathetic, trembling whisper. No answer. Just the faint sound of a generator humming somewhere deep in the tunnels. I should have run upstairs and barricaded my door. But a morbid curiosity took over. I took a step down, then another. I descended into the tunnel. At the bottom of the stairs, the brick corridor stretched out into the darkness. Thick, black extension cords were strung along the ceiling, crudely spliced into the building's main electrical box. I followed the cords down the corridor. About 50 feet in, the tunnel opened into a large, brick-lined chamber. And there, illuminated by a stolen construction floodlight, was my stuff. My winter coat was being used as a blanket on a filthy, stained mattress. The wrappers from my protein bars were scattered across the floor. But it wasn't just my stuff. There were hundreds of items stacked in neat piles. Bicycles, laptops, jewelry, canned food. It was a massive, subterranean hoarder's nest. Then, I heard a sickening sound to my right. It was the sound of raw meat being chewed. I snapped my flashlight beam toward the corner of the room. Sitting on an overturned bucket was a man. He was shockingly thin, his skin pale and covered in sores. He was wearing an oversized, dirty suit jacket. He had a can of raw ravioli in his hands and was scooping it into his mouth with his bare fingers. He stopped eating when the light hit his face. He didn't blink. He just stared at me with wide, hollow, utterly terrifying eyes. "That's my coat," I stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the mattress. The man slowly placed the can on the floor. He stood up. He was well over 6 feet tall, towering over me. "The upstairs belongs to us now," he whispered. His voice was a dry, raspy wheeze, like two pieces of sandpaper rubbing together. "You just pay the rent, but the house is ours." He reached behind the bucket and pulled out a massive, rusty machete. I didn't wait for him to swing. I spun around and bolted down the brick corridor, my boots slipping on the slick floor. "He's in the hallway! Stop him!" the man screamed, his voice suddenly booming and authoritative. From the shadows of the adjoining tunnels, I heard movement, shouting, the clatter of metal. There wasn't just one guy down there. There was an entire colony of them living beneath my feet, crawling up into our apartments through hidden vents and access panels while we slept. I hit the brick stairs and scrambled up them on all fours like an animal. I heard the man's heavy boots hitting the bottom of the stairs right behind me. I practically launched myself into the basement, grabbed the heavy wooden door, and slammed it shut just as the tip of the machete bit into the wood on the other side. There was a heavy iron latch on the outside of the door. I threw it into place, locking him in. The door shook violently as he slammed his body against it, screaming obscenities that echoed through the basement. I ran up to my apartment, grabbed my laptop and my wallet, and ran out the front door of the building into the night. I didn't even pack a bag. I just left. I called the police from a gas station. When they arrived, the wooden door in the basement was wide open again. The latch had been unscrewed from the inside. The tunnels were completely empty. The colony had stripped the nest of everything valuable and vanished deeper into the catacombs. The landlord tried to sue me for breaking my lease. I told him to go to hell. I moved into a high-rise on the other side of the river, on the 12th floor. I will never live on a ground floor again, and I will never, ever rent a building with a basement. because you never truly know who considers your home to be their roof. You'll never look at a storm grate or a basement door the same way again. I want to know what you would do in that final story. If you found an entire colony living beneath your apartment, are you moving out that same night? Or are you calling the cops and staying? Let me know your survival plan in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and lock your doors.